New body cam video shows the moment deputies respond to a woman shot dead inside a luxury hotel in Orlando, Florida. In the story, law enforcement say the suspect gave them allegedly didn't add up.
What's the address?
I'm at the Waldorf Astoria, Orlando. Oh my God.
The suspect is now awaiting trial in jail, accused of murder. So let's start with the beginning on this story and what we know up to this point. It happened at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Orlando, and that is a luxury hotel, one of the nicest hotel brands that you can go to. I mean, take a look at some of the pictures that we have of the Waldorf, just to paint a picture of the scene of where this alleged murder took place. This was the last place that Alana Miccolis was seen alive. According to her obituary, she loved marine biology, she volunteered at the Florida Aquarium, and she went to this hotel in December of 2023 with her then romantic partner. Law enforcement say that partner murdered her. Her name, Megha Saluja. She told police a very different story when she called 911 from their hotel room on December 8th.
And can you confirm what happened?
My partner, and we were like just talking, and then I walked to the bathroom, and I came back, she had a towel, and...
Did you say she shot herself in the head?
Yes.
You can certainly hear the urgency in her voice, shock in her voice with what she said just took place in that hotel room. That 911 call is just one of several pieces of evidence that Law&Crime has obtained through an open records request. Here's some body cam video of Orange County Sheriff's deputies responding after Saluja made that horrifying 911 call. The narrative that Saluja told the dispatcher is the story that she stuck with when she spoke with deputies later that day. She told investigators that she and Miccolis were in a relationship, and it was one that was about to come to an end, and they were taking a final trip together to the Waldorf. She also said they both had struggled with mental health issues in the past. Here's part of that conversation.
Were you still in contact with her, like, pretty frequently?
Yeah, so what happened was, like, around a month-ish ago, she kind of, like, we've been kind of together loosely for, like, 5.5 years. She has been, like, unhappy more of the time than not. I have, like, wanted to keep it going more, she's wanted to end it more. So about a month or so ago, she, like, kind of had, like, a freak out, and she was like, look, like, I can't do this with you anymore. She was like, I'm gonna go on a date with someone else. So then, like, we made this agreement. I was like, look, like, I just, like, didn't realize she was so unhappy with me and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, if you, like, I was like, can we, like, make an agreement? I was like, why don't we just, like, stop our relationship altogether? Like, I just want to, like, do some things together first, because, like, we basically said we, like, have to end a relationship. It's, like, bad for both of us. It's just, like, it's just, like, too, like, suffocating for both of us a little bit. We just, like, feel like she kind of feels like I'm always around. I feel like I'm always, like, worried about, like, her, like, going behind my back and, like, things like that. And so we were just, like, the only reason, like, we're still together is because, like, we just want to be in each other's lives, but, like, we don't know how to do that, like, without being together. So when she, like, went on a date with someone else, I was like, okay. Like, for me, I was like, this is a breaking point. I was like, can you, like, can we just, like, make an agreement? Like, let's just, like, have a lot of fun together, do a lot of things together. And so the deal was, like, she only goes on a few dates with whoever, and, like, it was someone that she wasn't even interested in, so I was like, I don't really care, like, that much, because, like, I knew in my mind, like, she doesn't care. I'm sorry, I think I'm, like, rambling. I'm just, like, so panicked.
No, you're fine.
She said that morning the two had allegedly been arguing. Saluja says that when they got back to the room after breakfast, she went to the bathroom and Miccolis allegedly fired the gun. According to Saluja, she then ran, grabbed the gun herself, and put it to her head, thinking she might take her own life, but decided against it. Here's what she told investigators.
All I remember is, like, I freaked out, ran, heard a gunshot, like, undid the towel, saw, like, something fall out, something fell onto the pillow, like disgustingly vividly, like, remember seeing those two things. And, like, I just remember, like, the smell, and I just, like, looked, like, I remember, like, looking at her, and I was like, oh my God. And I literally just, like, I grabbed the gun, I, like, put it against my head, because I was like, I don't know what just happened. Like, I just saw, like, blood. And then I, like, put it down. called 911 like immediately.
While we have photos of evidence like this notebook, we haven't learned what forensics, autopsy, and ballistic tests have revealed. Police did find this notebook, and it detailed a heartfelt conversation between two people. It held questions like, what would an open relationship look like? Police didn't arrest Saluja that day, but she did stay at the police station for hours. In a second interview with investigators, she stuck to that same story. And with great detail, she went into the relationship and the issues that she and Miccolis were having. I listened to more than an hour of the interviews that were released to us from police. There were two. And in the second interview, what really stood out was just that detail that she would go into about the relationship, about every single moment of conversation that she and Miccolis had leading up to that moment that the gun went off. But that was a moment that investigators continued to try to pull her back to explain what she saw in those moments after the gun went off. And she really struggled to get specific about that particular moment. Here's more of that second interview with investigators.
What about the actual towel over her head when you came out of the bathroom made you freak out and like run toward her?
I was just like, what's happening? Like, it was the fact that like we were so emotional and crying, and like I've been telling her for like weeks, like I said like so many times, like I'm so worried about you. Like her mom passed away 2 years ago, and like she's just been like a different person. Like she's been depressed. Like the closest people in her life know that she's like kind of depressed. She like doesn't share a lot about that with anyone, and so I think like I just like stay freaked out about her. I think like I have like almost for the last 2 years, like it's gotten a little bit better, but like this stuff comes up, and like she had like a like pretty decent mental breakdown like after the month, but like I think maybe about 3 weeks ago, like she had a pretty big mental breakdown, and she was like, I can't do this. Like she was like freaking out. I don't know if it was like I don't know like how her freakouts like manifest. I don't know if they're like only about one thing and then it comes out, or like if they're about a lot of things and they only come about as one thing. Like I don't know, but I know like she had a big like mental breakdown like a few weeks ago, and I was like, okay, I was like I will do, like to me I was like, it's more important for you to stay in my life. Like I was like, as long as I can still talk to you, and like we agreed, we were like, if anything crazy happens, like we can call the other, we'll drop everything and be there. Like that was our deal. And I was like, that's what I need from her. I was like, I like, and I told this to her too, I was like, I just need you to like be there for me. I was like, I don't care. I was like, I'll get over all of it. And I was like, you deserve to be happy. Like the reason that we were like splitting up now is because I was like, I realized. And so I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, I don't know. Like we were just, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. I understand these like emotions and thoughts come up, so you go on those little sidetracks and talk about that. That's fine. I just wanted to kind of stay.
I'm sorry.
You're fine. Don't apologize. You're fine. I just wanted to stay kind of on where we're at, where you came out of the bathroom, you saw the bathroom, or you saw the towel.
Yeah.
And again, I was just trying to clarify or understand why that was a trigger for you to go at her, or like run toward her, or freak out just seeing a towel near her head, because that's not something that most people in a normal setting would see. A towel, like my wife comes out with a towel on her head or near her head, I don't automatically think something's going to happen bad.
Well, like I don't know, I think it was just that like it was weird, and we were so emotional, and I've like I've been worried. Like I've said to her so many times, like, hey, like I think it was just that. It was just like that worry and that fear, and I was just like I don't know.
It's important to note that up until this point, Saluja had been told that Miccolis may still be alive and that she was at the hospital for treatment. More than 40 minutes into this second interview, deputies told her that Miccolis had died.
Is she okay?
No. She passed away. So, yeah.
No.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, please tell me you're with me right now. Please tell me she didn't pass away.
No, I'm sorry she died.
Are you serious?
Many people may look at that interaction, jurors may look at that interaction, the reaction to learning that Miccolis had died, as genuine shock and sadness. And that could be a key part of Saluja's defense when this case ends up going to trial. Another key piece of evidence that we received in that open records request are the text messages between the two women. The screen grabs show the majority of text messages are from Saluja, and they show that she is really struggling with this relationship coming to an end. And this particular text message stood out to us. It reads, Also, are you aware that nothing bad is gonna happen if you see me tonight? I don't know if you're worried about me doing something crazy or anything like that, but I'd never hurt you physically, ever, ever, ever. And in parentheses, also, if you don't believe that, why would I ruin our Miami trip, LOL, by doing anything crazy or stupid? It's not gonna be some whole thing. I kind of just wanna get in your car and calmly express a few things to you that have been hidden away for years and then go home, LOL. Roughly 6 months after the gun went off in that hotel room in Orlando, a grand jury indicted Megha Saluja. She's been charged with first-degree murder with a firearm. She has pleaded not guilty and is being held without bond ahead of trial, which is slated to begin later this year. So let's dive into what we know about the investigation at this point. Joining me is former NYPD detective Tom Smith. Tom, I know you listened to the audio recordings we have of these interviews that the suspect gave deputies. What stood out to you?
Well, there's a number of things that stood out. One is when you're going into those interviews, you have a one-sided conversation about what happened. There's no disputing at that point what that one woman is telling you. So you kind of have to take it at face value of what she's saying. And the parts that were very alarming or intriguing to me as a former detective in interviewing so many people that I got to was she focused so much on the mental health part of it and her suicidal tendencies and all that, which is kind of setting up her defense of what happened. But then there was a couple of things that really stood out to me that I was a little bit surprised the detectives didn't completely jump on. When you have a dramatic shift in her emotions, in her tone, in her questioning about what you're doing is always a red flag to me. What I mean by that was when they started talking to her about the search warrant for her phone and then the chemical test they were going to do on her hands if she ever fired a weapon. Now, most people, if you had nothing to do with that crime, are going to say, no problem. Here's my hands, give a test, no big deal. But the one thing that she said in the glaring statement that stood out to me was, well, I did touch the gun for a minute. Will it show up on that? That right there would have kept that woman in that interview room with me for another couple hours, because that's not your normal response. And there's not going to be really any residue that's going to be on your hands just by simply picking up a weapon after it's been fired. You may have a little residue on your fingers, but not like it would be as if you fired the weapon.
Because that was the moment where she said that she picked up the gun after she had seen what happened, and then she put it to her head for a minute, and she had mentioned that a couple times as it went through. I also, what stood out to me, and you're the former investigator, I'm not, just kind of someone who's listening, is she's so detailed about the relationship and every bit of conversation that they had leading up to this moment. And then when the detective asks about the moment that it happens, which is the key couple minutes that'll determine everything in this, she strays back to the relationship. Right. What did you make of that?
Well, that happens a lot when you have crimes that are committed by individuals. They can plan out their alibi. That is the norm. They will set up in their head what they can say, what their story is going to be. But when they get jammed up is when they can't anticipate what detectives are going to ask them. And that's when they get all screwed up in their interview and their statements. They can't anticipate what's on the detective's mind or his line of questioning. So when that happens is when they get rattled and they just stick to, what their story is. And when they start to get into a different part of an alibi is what you need to key on when they're making statements. One of the things that I always let happen was let them talk. If I had someone in front of me that was just rambling, and let them talk, because eventually they're going to screw up because they can't keep the line and the lie in their head for too long without getting it all jumbled and messed up.
What was I know picking up the gun was one of the mistakes, but when you think of, because she gets some really long answers, kind of repeats herself over and over again. Was there a moment that line of kind of response she was giving changed a bit?
Changed on the minds of the detectives?
Just in terms of the story that she was giving and kind of the details she was giving, maybe not just the picking up the gun, but just in the way that she was talking, that would have had a detective say, something seems a little off here from what I'd be expecting?
Oh yeah, because there's actions that are taken at the scene of a suicide, especially someone that you love and have a relationship with. You know, it's an immediate, oh my God, and kind of a first aid thing, not let me grab the gun and put it to my head. That's very odd to think that's her first thought. Now, if you fast forward into her committing the crime, she basically chickened out of taking her own life. Should it have been a murder suicide that was on her mind, and then she couldn't pull herself to do it? That could be, but you have to go on certain reactions of people when they're describing what happened to a loved one, and her account of the towel and where the towel was, and hearing the shot and walking away from her when she apparently, by her statement, had a towel on her head, and then heard a shot and ran in and grabbed the gun. That's just a little bit too much for me when it comes to a loved one committing suicide in the next room.
That's actually a really good point on the not administering first aid either, because in the 911 call, and we didn't want to air too much of it because it's pretty graphic in what she's describing, but it wasn't determined that she was dead until later that day. Mm-hmm. So she didn't apply first aid. It was that grabbing of the weapon. That's a good point. How do you, when you're interviewing someone, knowing that they went through a traumatic and a shocking experience, kind of balance that shock that I'm sure a criminal defense attorney is going to point to? What would you do in this situation if you had a loved one who was in this, with also a narrative where, if the defense is, I don't really remember what happened, how do you balance that and figuring out what they actually may have done?
Yeah, you have to be, first of all, you have to be cognizant of the situation. And you're going to hope that it was, she wasn't involved. So you have to be disciplined and not getting ahead of yourself when it comes to what you're thinking. And, you have to have a little compassion into what had happened. That's going to play into making that person feel comfortable, making it feel like you're on her side and you're feeling what she is. So there's a balancing act, like you said, Chris, very well, that there's a balancing act in getting the information from her, but still keeping that person calm enough to think you're on her side and you're believing everything she's saying. And that's part of just the interview game that you have to play. But you have to really pay attention to everything she's saying and take mental notes of it in order to get her into a corner of not telling the truth or being accurate in what had happened.
I want to talk about that interview game a little bit, because she had a first interview with 2 investigators, and then it appears a little later on they have this second interview, and the detective who comes in for that second interview is, can you just get me caught up to speed on, as if he didn't know anything about the case whatsoever. What is the strategy behind that?
That's perfect. That's such a great strategy, because like I said, when you have someone that's under stress and making up stuff as they go along, she might have felt like, hey, I did great in the first interview, but now you're having someone going, tell me again. It's very hard to recall lies and keep track of the lies that you told and the responses that you gave to other detectives. That is very difficult. So that strategy of bringing someone brand new in and asking her to do it again is absolutely textbook interview 101, great strategy.
Because likely behind the scenes, that detective knew everything that was said in that first interview before entering that second interview.
Absolutely. I used to tell people I interviewed all the time, listen, there's not a question I'm going to ask you I don't already know the answer to. So, did I say that all the time? No, but there were situations that I did that because you either didn't have time to screw around and wait for them to just continuously lie. So I would say that a lot. Every question I am asking you, I already know the answer to. But in this case, they let her kind of, get the rope out there to hang herself. And it's a great strategy. I love that they did that.
And I think about the fact, too, that she was clearly the only other person in the room. But in a lot of cases where someone does actually take their own life, and if another person was in a home or in a room and they're not a suspect, would they be kept at a police station for the hours that she did? Does that tell you that police maybe already had a red flag, that something may not be what she was saying it is?
Yeah, well, the thing about investigating any crime, you don't want to come to a conclusion in your head too quick. You want to leave every avenue open of possibilities of something happening. So you take your time and you bring witnesses in and you talk to them in a detailed way, because let's just say it was a suicide. You need to really pin that down, and you need to get into the victim's background and what was going on and what was said beforehand, which can lead to a investigative conclusion. But if you have any doubt in what had happened, you need to take the appropriate steps of separating witnesses and bringing them in and being thorough in the interview that you do.
She talked about the suspect having mental health issues. She said that the alleged victim had mental health issues as well, that they were in this relationship that was coming to an end. She seemed to, at least when I listened to it, that it was more of a mutual relationship ending than it was one-sided. But then you see these text messages that we obtained, and that looks, at least to me, was pretty one-sided. From an investigative standpoint, what stood out to you when you read those?
Yeah, exactly what you said. And that's the reason you do these interviews. And they do the interviews first. You get a background of the relationship and each person and what they're feeling, what they're doing. And then you go into their text messages, which can either add up to the same conclusion that the interviews did, or paint a completely different picture of what was said. And that's just part of the whole investigative process. You take your time, you're methodical in what you do in obtaining either evidence or information related to this crime. So, if there is something to present to a district attorney or state's attorney, you have that all with you. I've said it a lot that when you have a case that may lead to an indictment or the arrest of someone, that trial prep starts immediately. So the trial prep, you're already beginning with the interviews, with documenting it the right way, with obtaining search warrants. That was a great move, that he did also on the audio that I listened to. Yeah, you can give me consent. That's great, but I'm still getting a warrant, because what they're doing is they're prepping for the future. They're prepping for a possible trial and indictment. And that's what you just do in an investigative situation like this.
At the time of this recording, we don't have the forensic tests that were done, an autopsy that was done. We don't have that information, a ballistics test. I know we talked about gunshot residue, but how can you tell the difference between someone who shot themselves and someone who was shot by someone?
Well, there's a lot of factors that go into it. Where the body is, how the body is laying on the bed, where the gun is that was used, where does it fall, the entry wound, is there any powder burns around the head? There's a number of things, and you get even more detailed once an autopsy is done. Detectives can look at it just from a kind of 30,000-foot view of what they're looking at, but the real evidence comes out during the autopsy.
And when that information comes out, or assuming that law enforcement already has that information and prosecutors have that information, how much will that matter in this trial? It obviously will matter a lot, but as you balance the interview, the text messages, you probably can't get a conviction just on that alone without a confession. So assuming that scientific evidence would need to be there for this case to move forward as it has.
Oh, that's huge. It's enormous because, it's layers. When you're doing an investigation, it's layers. You start off with one thing, you get another piece of evidence and another piece of evidence, and then you can somewhat create a timeline of what happened. But the pathology report and all that and the autopsy is very, very key in this, because it's going to line everything else up. Because then once you have that, then if there's an opportunity to interview her again, you just start picking away at the evidence that you have in comparison to the statements that she made.
Yeah, this was it was roughly 6 months later, in June of last year, that she was arrested and charged with murder. And now in 2025, the case is expected to go to trial. Tom Smith, always great to have you on. Thanks for your perspective on this as we break it down.
Always a pleasure, Chris. Thanks again.
Joining us now is Florida-based criminal defense attorney Michael Beltran, who's also a former state rep in the state of Florida. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know you know the Orlando area well. What stands out to you when you look at the evidence, at least at this point, that we have ahead of a trial?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. One thing that stands out to me was that the police interview was very inconclusive as to the accused's guilt. I know toward the end of the interview, it went for almost an hour. Toward the end of the interview was when the detective finally told the suspect that, in fact, the decedent was deceased. It wasn't established until the end, and there appeared to be a very genuine emotional reaction. These women were in some kind of a personal relationship. There was some talk of a breakup, and I think that's why the detective was asking the questions that he was and created perhaps some suspicion. But also, these women obviously cared for each other. You can tell that from the text messages. You can tell that from the interview, which I found to be credible. It was only audio, so there was no video or body language, facial
Mm.
expression to go by. But from the audio, I found the suspect to be fairly credible in that respect.
It was one thing that stood out to me was when she's answering questions, she continues to go into this detail over and over and over again about the relationship and the conversations that they had leading up to this moment where the gun goes off. But then the detective keeps trying to get more information about that particular moment. And then she strays from that moment again. Do you read anything into that?
I think her testimony, or at least her statement, was that she was in the restroom in a hotel room. This was a very fancy hotel, by the way. She also testified that she lived in 55 West, which is one of the most expensive apartment buildings in Orlando, right where Church Street Station used to be. So they were in this expensive hotel room, I guess together. The suspect went in the bathroom, according to the suspect, and the decedent shot herself, or somehow the gun went off and delivered a bullet into her head. And so that's her testimony. So she wouldn't have a lot of details about what happened in the bedroom when she was in the bathroom. Now, could somebody else prove something different? Perhaps, but the facts of the case are there were two women in the hotel room. They were in a personal relationship. No one else was in there unless one of the other guests nearby heard arguing or heard some dialogue, or unless some of the text messages that haven't come out shed additional light. I think, based on the evidence I've seen, the prosecutor is short of beyond a reasonable doubt. They may even be short of something that you could win in a civil case. So I think the evidence is a little thin. I would want to see ballistics. I would want to see gunshot residue analysis. I would want to see other forensics to get across that finish line, if indeed the prosecutor is going to be able to do that at all.
Yeah, because we're still waiting to get some of the ballistic information and understanding exactly what the moment was. This was about 6 months from the time that this incident happened to then the arrest taking place. The text messages I thought were interesting too, because you have in the conversation with the detectives, the suspect makes it seem like this was a very mutual parting of ways of the relationship, and they were trying to figure things out. But then you look at the text, and it's just a long list. It seems very one-sided in terms of how the relationship was ending. What impact on a jury, if this was presented to it, could that discrepancy have that the prosecutors wanted to go in that direction?
I guess I had a little bit of a different perspective on the text messages. I thought it was clear from the text messages that both of these women were having some mild, but still some mental health issues. I think there were mental health issues on both sides. There was reference to counseling. There was reference to this one needing counseling, that one needing counseling, and having their needs met, and so forth, whatever that means. So I did not take away the one-sided nature the way you did, and obviously that's going to be for 6 men and women in Orange County to decide. So perhaps not, my opinion is certainly not determinative on that. But in terms of the evidence, I think it's a little bit light, and obviously, you know, I don't think they get there on the text messages. I don't think they get there on the interview. I think I keep coming back to, I think you need forensics to push this across the line to a prosecutable case, and I don't know that they have it. It certainly hasn't been reported in the news, and I haven't seen it. So I think they're going to need forensics. I think, the other thing is this is an office that has been for many years under multiple administrations vilified in the media for not prosecuting violent crime. The case seems like a little bit of a reach to me. Obviously, more facts could come out. I could be wrong, but perhaps they are trying to establish that they're tough on crime, tough on violent crime, tough on crimes involving women victims or dating violence or whatever it is. They may be trying to use this as a high profile case to kind of prove a point, which is prosecutors should never do that, but sometimes they do.
A grand jury was the path that this particular case went leading to the arrest. Why does it have to go to that point? Like, what does that tell you when it's a grand jury is involved as opposed to a prosecutor filing charges?
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to be cliche here, but I will give you the
Sure.
cliche about, that you can indict a ham sandwich in front of a grand jury,
Ham
right? So
sandwiches get indicted a lot. I've heard that. Ham
ham
sandwich.
sandwiches. I
I've
got a
heard
lot
that
of
a
ham
lot.
sandwiches for clients, but anyway,
Yeah.
look, the point is that just because you were indicted doesn't mean you're guilty. Really, just kind of for the viewer's benefit, indictment means that somebody found there was probable cause. Probable cause means this is something worth looking into. So that may be like a 20-25% confidence that there was a crime committed and that the suspect is the one who committed it. For a civil case, you got to prove preponderance, 51%. For reasonable doubt, you're really talking 95-98% is really what I think is reasonable doubt. It probably should be higher, but I think juries convict in the 80s and even in the 70s sometimes. So to say you have probable cause and then make a jump and say you can get all the way, I think maybe there's probable cause. Maybe 25, 30, 40% they could prove at this point. They couldn't get me to award money damages to the decedent's family if I was sitting on the jury. And I don't think they can convince 6 people in Orange County that beyond a reasonable doubt. I just don't think they can do that on the evidence I've seen.
For you as a criminal defense attorney, this suspect was, after saying that she witnessed the death of the person she was in a relationship with, she's at the police department or the sheriff's office for, in the interview, they said hours, and she spoke with them for more than an hour. Should she at a point during that the term saying lawyering up as opposed to just having the conversation with police? What do you make of that?
I thought, well, so first of all, as we talked about earlier, it was only at like the end, like 40 minutes into the interview, she asks the detective, is my friend okay? And he says, no, she died hours ago. So whether that was genuine or not, obviously a
Yeah.
gunshot to the head isn't a good prognosis, but I don't think and her state of mind changed at that point. She didn't know that the woman was killed, and she's either a really good actress or wasn't the trigger woman. It's one of the two. But in terms of kind of going back to your question, I mean, in terms of, I thought that there was a little bit, because remember when she's talking to her sister's downstairs, her sister's picking her up, whatever happened, whether death or serious injury, it was traumatic for her. She asked to see her sister multiple times, and the detective says, no, we got to do this test, we got to finish the interview, we got to do that. If I were her defense counsel, I'd be making a Miranda motion, because she wasn't free to leave. She wasn't free to leave because she said she wanted to leave a couple of times. And he said, no, you got to finish talking to me and you got to do this. He didn't quite say you need to finish talking to me, but he said, we need to finish what we need to do. So I think there's a little bit of a Miranda. She doesn't lawyer up, to her credit, right? I mean, obviously you can't use, quote, lawyering up under the Fifth Amendment. You can't reference that to the jury, right? That cannot be referenced by the prosecutor. But to her credit, she sat there for almost an hour and answered his questions. So I think she's got a lot going for her in this case. Look, I wasn't in the hotel room. I don't know who pulled the trigger,
Right.
but I don't think the prosecutors got the goods. So,
In your experience in seeing cases involving firearms, what is the type of forensic information that could come out that changes the narrative? I know we were talking about like gunshot residue on someone's hands. That can be a big part of it. Trajectory of bullets. What would you be looking for that would make you relook this case?
Well, so you would look at the gunshot residue on both the four. We test 4 hands, right? The decedent's hands and the suspect's hands. You'd test 4 hands, and you'd figure out where the gunshot residue was. You'd figure out from ballistics or from an autopsy. You may be able to figure out. I assume it's a handgun. Nobody said whether it was a handgun, but it was in a hotel room. I don't think they brought a long barrel rifle
Right.
into a hotel room and had an accident with that. And if it's a long gun, obviously it's a little hard to shoot yourself with a long gun, so the suspect probably has more problems. But we would have known about that. So you would know what the exit velocity is. There was remarks about it being a hollow point, which can cause more damage because it expands when it goes into the body, and it's less likely to ricochet. I suspect but I don't know that I haven't seen the autopsy, but the bullet probably lodged in somewhere in the skull rather than in the wall, given that it was a hollow point shot at a lower velocity from a handgun. These are all things that you would put together and try to reconstruct the trajectory, the velocity of the bullet, and what gun it was fired out of and by who. And I think the testimony was actually that the suspect owned a gun. Maybe the decedent got a hold of it. Maybe the suspect was using the gun. But it doesn't seem, there was nothing in the text messages that said, there was a mention of a suicide by the decedent, it appeared. There was no mention of like any malice remotely approaching a homicide on the part of the suspect. And so I think, again, if you look at the text messages combined with the forensics and frankly lack thereof in this case, at least what's been produced to us for our analysis, I think they're going to have pretty tough. And if they find more text messages, if the gunshot residue is on the suspect's hand, if it's clear from the ballistics or the autopsy that the gun was fired from more than a couple feet away, then that becomes pretty damning forensic evidence against the defendant.
What do you make of the timeline where this was an incident that happened December 2023 and then the arrest isn't until June of 2024?
I wouldn't read that much into that as much as I would read into other parts of the interview. It's a complex case. Obviously, the prosecutors shouldn't rush to judgment. This particular defendant or suspect apparently was known flight risk. So it's not unusual when you have family type of situations. I've had a lot of suspects who either don't go in or don't go in until much later, until they're actually charged months later. So that's not necessarily unusual, even in a homicide case. Even in a homicide case, you don't necessarily go in. I mean, there are a lot of people who were on bond or who were originally on bond. You really don't go in unless you're a flight risk or you're a danger to the community. You don't go in unless you resist arrest or like do like something like what OJ did, or frankly, some of my clients before they, not when they're under my care, but before they engage me, they don't always make good choices between the time of the alleged crime and the charges or being brought into custody. But those are the type of things that get you detained. But the fact she wasn't apparently detained at that time, because they didn't have the evidence. I don't know if they have it now, but they obviously had to do the workup and they didn't have what they needed until later. But it doesn't affect the merits of the case that much, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's really good perspective, and we'll see how this plays out. I mean, obviously, it is a complicated case because there's really just two people who know exactly what happened really inside that hotel room. We'll see in a couple months when this is at least scheduled to go to trial how it plays out. Florida criminal defense attorney Michael Beltran, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
According to court records that we reviewed, Saluja is slated to stand trial in April. For Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart.